Okay, my English teacher friends. So in this writing workshop video, I have what I'm hoping to be a super high engagement exercise to practice my templates with regards to constructing a synthesis essay. And our topic is this: to prompose or not to prompose. So at the time of making this video, students are all a tizzy about how and whom to ask to the homecoming dance. So my juniors are very distracted by this, and it's been tough to teach above the foray of that hormonal flux. So I'm like, all right, why don't I use this as fodder for a good synthesis essay? So here it is: to prompose or not to prompose. So what we'll do is we'll take a look at how to declare or invert the thesis in terms of constructing the introductory paragraph. And then, as always, for those that are familiar with my work, we will construct the body paragraph syllogistically. So here's the prompt. Sam, a sparkly and introspective junior in high school, is weighing the pros and cons of promposing to their longtime crush, Riley. Ever since the sixth grade, Sam has been infatuated with Riley, but has kept this crush under tight secrecy. So here are the directions. Read the following sources and accompanying contextual information carefully. Write a letter to Sam that addresses the following essential question: to prompose or not to prompose? 'Tis the question. In your essay, synthesize material from at least 3 sources to develop your position. Well, I've cobbled together a packet of the pros and cons of promposing. I have one article in there about public proposals and the good, bad, ugly of doing things, under public display, under public scrutiny, and love languages and how people, feel based on personality types, emotional types, how they receive those public displays of affection or those public proposals. And I have some YouTube videos in there. One goes over the sexist and racist aspects, the history of the prom, which I found to be kind of fascinating. So whole bunch of stuff in there. And if you want the packet, then just email me. My email's at the end of this video, and I'll forward that to you. Or you can cobble together your own resources for your students, or even have them research on their own and go at it. So the first question we have to ask ourselves is this: how do I write the introductory paragraph? And as always, since we're doing synthesis, we have the 50-50 coin flip option of declaring the thesis or inverting the thesis. So let's break down what I mean by that. So as you can see here, the declarative I have in this triangle. And oftentimes in argument, somebody will say, dude, what's your point? Get to your point. Come on already. What's your point? And when you declare the thesis, you're dropping your point in the first sentence: to prompose or not to prompose. So you answer the essential question right out of the gate. Just boom, drop it like it's hot in that opening sentence. So you begin with the thesis. From there, you're going to flesh it out with some context and background. Don't get into your reasons. Don't get into your sources. Don't quote. Don't paraphrase anything. It's just context and background. And then, as always, we're going to sprinkle in a little bit of tier 2 level vocabulary. And what I mean by that is your average run-of-the-mill SAT level words. So many of you know that I run an intensive word study academy with all of my students throughout the course of the academic year. So I do see my students' vocabulary augment exponentially over the course of the academic year, because I do have a concentrated vocabulary word study program. Sentence constructs. So I borrow heavily from Strunk and White's idea that they espouse in rule number 18 in their seminal book called Write It Right. Rule number 18 asserts that there's 12 different ways to construct a single sentence. So I want my students to have some expressive syntax when they write. So you should see my students wield some complex sentences and have purpose, at least, in deciding which sentence construct to lay down, right? So there's a purpose for declarative sentences, there's purpose for long, loose sentences, etc. So we'll get into that in just a second. So they should have some nice voice rhythm and flow. But let me go back to tier 2 vocabulary for a second. This is the type of essay where you're writing a letter to a friend. You're writing a letter to Sam. So I wouldn't want it to be totally geeked out and pedantic. So I do want to see a certain degree of colloquial and vernacular in there mixed in with the academic. So we're going to talk about that teeter-totter voice of colloquial academic vernacular, right? So in terms of getting the elusive sophistication point in AP Lang and AP Lit, I really think it's important to cop that kind of voice, and we're going to experiment with that in this particular essay. And then all introductions with my templates are 4 sentences long, no more, no less. So if we flip it and invert the thesis, you're going to end. So you begin with the context and background, and as you funnel it down towards your 4th sentence, I can't right now. You're going to end with the thesis and answer the essential question: to prompose or not to prompose. So just context, background. Maybe you begin with a hook or an analogy. I got a couple of examples of how to do that. Sprinkle in the tier 2 level words, exactly 4 sentences. Manipulate those sentence constructs for effect. So let's dive right in and take a look at a few. One, a lot of my students don't know how to write a letter, so I got to teach them greetings and salutations, and just a simple "Hi, Sam," because it's informal. We're gonna, we know Sam, so we can just kind of dive right in. But we need a greeting. Hi, Sam. My grandfather, who was a professional lion trainer in the circus, lived by the following adage: if it don't feel right, get the hell out of the cage as fast as you can. Clearly, given what you know about Riley's disposition, their likes and dislikes, promposing does not feel aligned with either them or you. So why force the issue? In other words, run like hell and find another means to express your intent. Otherwise, this whole thing could implode with disastrous results. So you can see here I'm beginning with a hook, an analogy. This circus trainer grandfather says, if it don't feel right, get the hell out of the cage as fast as you can, which is basically the expressive message to Sam that, hey, this promposing stuff doesn't feel right. Don't do it. And the thesis comes at the bottom here, right? So in other words, run like hell and find another means to express your intent. Otherwise, this whole thing could implode with disastrous results. Right? So it's like a poker game. You show your cards before you drop them. I also liken it to Tom Brady coming up to the line of scrimmage and saying to the defensive line, hey, I'm going to run down 42 blue on the count of 3, which means that I'm going to give the ball to, the running back here, number 34, and he's going to hit your left tackle right in the nose and run for a touchdown, right? So you announce your intent, you announce the direction, but don't get into your reasons, don't get into the articles, don't get into summarizing. It's just to prompose or not to prompose. So yes or no, or you can qualify it. So you're going to say yes, no, qualify up top, yes, no, qualify at the bottom, either or. So here's another one. Dear Sam, given that you've nursed your crush for Riley ever since the 6th grade, my advice is to shoot big and go with the biggest and best promposal of them all. So this is declarative. You can see here we've answered the essential question. Now flesh it out with some context and background. To express a big love in a big way is the only option. The bigger you go, the more likely they are to say yes. So I say shoot for the moon and stars. 4 sentences. Again, let's take a look at the vocab, because this is kind of informal. We're writing to a friend. So let's see in this first one. We have adage, disposition, aligned, implode, intent. So not overdoing it. We stay in our wheelhouse. Again, don't be contrived. Don't be pretentious. And this one keeps it really simple, really, really basic in terms of the verbiage and dropping a lexicon on your reader. So pretty simple, straightforward stuff. So I like to show my students a whole wide range of these. My advice is this: eliminate all cheesiness and express your intent in the most authentically genuine way that feels aligned with your heart. So we begin, my dear friend. I forgot that. So we're kind of getting at the thesis. Sounds declarative. Clearly, you're not one who is comfortable with grandiose displays of public affection. And given what you know about Riley, they'd probably be mortified if you promposed in some hyped up, demonstrative way. Play things out real cool and suave and do something that expresses the tenderness of your soul. So again, little context background, state the thesis up top, state it at the bottom, sprinkle in some tier 2, focus on those sentence constructs. Like, look at this first sentence, right? It's pretty complex. Follow it up clearly, comma, and off you go. So just, use and alternate different sentence constructs, different sentence variables, and all takes care of itself, that teeter-totter balance of the colloquial and the academic. So here's another one. Howdy, Sam. Question for you. Do you want to be a mindless lemming who follows the masses blindly? Or do you want to express your heart in the purest and most authentic of ways? So I usually have my students avoid rhetorical questions as an opening line, but I want to show them, I wrote this one, by the way. I want to show them, if you do it, you have to have purpose, you have to have effect, and you need to be artful about it. But oftentimes students begin with these real flat, dud rhetorical questions to begin an essay. My rule of thumb typically is avoid it, but if you have purpose, if you have intent, if it works, then roll with it. Given what we both know about Riley, they value people who march to the beat of their own drummer. And knowing this, you need to be you and show your true face. As such, I suggest you go with the biggest and best promposal the world has ever seen. So this is clearly inverted, answering to prompose or not to prompose in the last sentence. So that's a clear articulation of the thesis statement in the last sentence. And again, no, don't regurgitate the sources, don't quote the sources, don't regurgitate the prompts. So just straight up context background, lay the stage for the dropping of the thesis in the fourth line. Sprinkle in some tier 2. I like this, mindless lemming, who fouls the masses blindly. It's very good. So march to the beat of your own drummer. So some colloquial, some vernacular expressions parceled in with the tier 2. Got one more for you. Hey there, good buddy. Prompose now already, will you? All right, so just answer the question. So I'm just kind of showing degrees and variations here for my struggling and emerging writers, and even for my kids with great aptitude. Just be very direct. You don't need to dance around the bush and go for a bird walk or pussyfoot around it. You can just drop it like it's hot. You've been suppressing this crush for years and holding the secret to yourself. Let the cat out of the bag. Muster up all the moxie, gumption, and courage at your disposal and march into the cafeteria tomorrow during lunch and announce your intentions to the God Almighty world. Right? So very declarative. You do this, right? Sam's our friend. She's our buddy. So we can do this. We can speak this way. Here's another one. Hi, Sam. Knowing what this means to you, I suggest you lay out all the variables. So this is setting the stage for an inverted. So we probably have the answer to the essential question down here. We hope to have it down here. First, you are reserved for the most part and shy. Riley is likewise on the timid and introverted side of things. Given this, I'd avoid a public proclamation at all costs and find an approach that more closely matches both of your personalities and styles. All right, always 4 sentences every single time, right? Sprinkle in some tier 2, focus on those sentence constructs. Thesis either comes first, thesis comes last. You're writing a letter, so set it up so that it looks like a letter. All right, so that was 6 introductions all done the same way. Declare or invert. You're writing to a friend, so I'm allowing my students to use the personal I. They can write from the first person. And I plan on doing some videos in the near future here where our good friends that take AP language for the synthesis essay, and especially for FRQ3, students are allowed to use first person. And this is throwing teachers for a loop because it goes against like long-standing taboos of don't say I, don't talk in the first person. And sometimes to get that elusive sophistication point, students really need to, especially in FRQ3, but it's a nice rhetorical tact if students can do it artfully in the synthesis essay as well in FRQ1. So our next question is this: how do I write the body paragraphs? And as always, we're going to bust out the syllogistic method. So I'm assuming most people are familiar with my work at this stage of the game, so I'm going to give a real furtive fly through this. And for those wanting a deeper dive into the syllogistic method, plow through my YouTube channel. There's a ton of videos where I really delve deep into this. So the syllogistic method is rooted in the Aristotelian tradition. Aristotle ran a school called the Lyceum, and the rich aristocratic boys would go there to learn about polemics, debate, oration, wordsmithing, word wrangling. And they had their own set of essential questions, and one of them you might be familiar with. What is justice, which is at the core of Plato's Republic, one of the seminal texts. And the philosophers, the students, would chew on that question, and they'd step to the proverbial mic and they would drop their definition of justice and say, aha, I've conquered the world. I'm the smartest philosopher there is. And Aristotle noted that the real great orators, they cloaked or they kind of cushioned their arguments in a syllogistic equation. And what that means is you go from premise to conclusion. So premise 1, I could say arsenic is deadly. Premise 2, my dog ate arsenic. Conclusion, my dog is going to die. And we'd all say, Christian, that's very cogent, that's well reasoned, it's very logical, very mathematical, very computative. When our students write, they need to have this direct line of reasoning. And the biggest snafu, glitch, or pitfall with synthesis, students begin their body paragraphs with the second premise. That's why when we read their papers and we're like, oh my goodness, you're just summarizing the sources. This reads like a Cliff Note summation of 7 sources, right? The directions state it 3 times very clearly. Your argument must be central, right? So I'm going to show you some cheat codes, some hacks for that first premise. They're very training wheel, right? Very much a scaffold. But early in the academic year, the first couple of times you're teaching synthesis, it really works well. And then those training wheels got to get kicked off and the scaffolds come down to get a little bit more nuanced and skillful. But it holds the kids upright. It holds that argument upright and makes it easier to sustain a line of reasoning that is intact from start to finish. So in terms of, tweaking that type of syllogistic equation into a template for the purposes of writing synthesis, the first premise is going to be an argument containing a why reason. So notice in all 6 introductions, we did not say why we were saying yes, or why we were saying no, or why we were going, I'm going to stay in the gray and ride the fence. You save your why reason for the first premise. Here's the kicker. The first premise is going to be 3 sentences long to really, really, really ensure the centrality of the argument. So that's going to be 3 sentences long, and I got a whole bunch of examples to show you what I mean by that. Because students get hung up on why reason. They don't. That sometimes is a difficult concept. Textual support is going to come in a teeter-totter balance of quoting and paraphrasing. We know we have to work in 3 sources per the directions. Conclusion, I always tell students that the first premise is a promise. So we got to make sure we're keeping our promises, and then we link it back to the thesis and echo the prompt, echo that essential question. And students often ask good questions, and they say, Mr. Kuhn, since the intro is 4 sentences long, no more, no less, and we're using templates. How many sentences is a syllogistic body paragraph? All of this, these 3 moves, should take about 10 sentences. I put a hard cap at 12. I really don't want them going over 12 unless they have a purpose, but not too much over 12. Otherwise, that's just straight up bloviation, right? They're probably going to go on a bird walk and lose the line of reasoning or break the line of reasoning. So I say shoot for 10. Those little itty bitty 4 or 5 sentence baggers that we sometimes read just don't have enough going on to fully substantiate and prove an argument. So here are a couple sample first premises. And just to remind you again, it's an argument containing a why reason. So I say, wait, but why? Why are you arguing yes? Why are you arguing no? Why are you in the middle? So there are a few reasons why you should go big or go home. So this is super training wheel here. If students say reason why in their first sentence, it usually necessitates them dropping a reason why. So again, it's not the most artful thing to do, but they can do it. The second training wheel device is to enumerate your reasons. So typically in a body paragraph, you have 1 or 2 reasons that you're going to support and defend. So look at how this is enumerated here. First, a love such as yours must not be expressed on a small scale. And second, Riley is the type of person deserving of only the best and extravagant promposals known to the history of mankind. So you got your reasons why, 1, 2. And then in terms of sustaining the line of reasoning, you just drop the line, 1, 2. You have to get, quotes and paraphrases that align to the 1 and quotes and paraphrases that align to the 2 and go in that sequential chronological order. That's an easy way to do it. Here's another one. The reasons why you need to exercise discretion are quite clear. Again, say reasons why. Enumerate. First, Riley is like the biggest nonconformist in the world, so you really can't follow the masses on this one and unfurl a cheeseball promposal. Second, you both hate being in the spotlight. So if we're going to keep the promise of the first premise, we have to talk about certain things. 1, it's not going to work for a nonconformist. This authentic kid, does not want a cheeseball promposal, right? You got to think out of the box for someone of the caliber of Riley. And second, you're both kind of shy and introverted. You don't like the spotlight. So why would you do this in a crowded cafeteria during lunch? So avoid doing that. So you just go find quotes, paraphrases for 1. Find quotes, paraphrases for 2 in the source material and have at it. So here's another one. During our formative years, there are just a handful of wonderful rites of passage, and going to the prom just so happens to be one such event. So this is kind of taking the scaffold of the reason why off. The pressure to not screw this up is enormous. I get that. But in acknowledging this, you need to be yourself. And clearly, you are not one given to showmanship and being in the spotlight. So clearly then, in terms of keeping everything germane and linked to the promise of the first premise, we got to talk about this showmanship and this introverted quality of Sam. So again, go get all the quotes and paraphrases you can to flesh that out. So let's take a look at a whole syllogistic body paragraph from first premise, second premise to conclusion. Again, first premise is going to be 3 sentences long. Get to the reason why. Drop your line of reasoning. The reasons why you need to exercise discretion are quite clear. First, Riley is like the biggest nonconformist in the world, so you really can't follow the masses on this one and unfurl a cheeseball promposal. Second, you both hate being in the spotlight. So look, I said 1, I said 2. So going down through this, I need some 1s up in here, some quotes and paraphrases connected to 1, and then I need some quotes and paraphrases connected to 2. So fourth sentence begins the second premise, and I tell my students, get quoting and paraphrasing right in that fourth sentence. Do you see how if you're not quoting and paraphrasing in those first 3 sentences, it keeps the centrality of the argument, right? Which is what we want. Kids get into those sources too early based on my observation of reading lots of essays over the years. Given that you are so intimately aware of Riley's love language and how they like to express and receive attention, it's important that you not approach the proposal by doing what you want, but what they would want. So that comes from source A. So really got to help kids get the best quotes. And I like doing chalk talk like chalk talk, put things on the chalkboard, put it on the easel, like the best possible quotes that we can use for all directions of the thesis, the yes, the no, and then the gray area thesis. So quoting with deliberation is something that needs to be taught. So we quoted, let's analyze this. Just to remind you, in factoring all the variables, in this situation, your needs, wants, and desires come second to Riley's. So that's a good unpacking of the quote. And something of great importance to consider, Riley's very grounded and down to earth. A promposal simply is way too over the top for a person like them and feels like a conformist, trendy cliche. So why are we talking about this? Because we promised that we would up here, right? This whole thing is just a line, right? I have that video in my YouTube channel about the yarn test, and this is definitely going to adhere to the yarn test. Further, Riley does not have the standard expectation at 15 for being asked out on a date, which includes a pool float, donuts, and a choreographed flash mob, source C. I'm just picking and choosing quotes that help me support my argument here, right? And again, this quote is aligned to the enumerated 1 and 2 in the first premise. Quote, analyze. The scenario you are weighing kind of goes to the old adage, if everyone else is jumping off the bridge, will you? Please do not take the plunge into the waters of certain rejection and failure. Take as an example David, who once he got into a relationship knew he had to step his game up and do a kick-ass proposal. Source F. So we've worked 3 in here now. Note the quotes that I have in here and how silky smooth the quote transitions are. I use something called the 5-word rule. If a student has 5 words, a minimum of 5 words in front of the quote, and they keep the quote small, it should sound conversational, but note here with my arrow, like sometimes you got to bracket, right? So I bracket quite a bit when I write to make it conversational. So you got to teach that to students. So we quoted, let's analyze. Break down the logic here. He's in a secure and loving relationship, yet feels compelled to do a grandiose promposal. Clearly, one needs to consider his motivations. Come to find out, David's intentions were a bit askew in that it completely embarrassed her. That was the point, and everyone else loved it. Source F. So we got 4 quotes in here, which is kind of on the heavy side. But you got to use those sources to advance your argument. And notice, these quotes and these paraphrases are talking back to the promise. They're like shaking hands with the promise. So you got to quote, you got to paraphrase with absolute deliberation. So we're at the conclusion here. We have to echo that first promise, go back to the prompt, and go back to the thesis. Please do yourself a favor and avoid humiliating not only Riley, but yourself. Ratchet down the expectations and meet Riley where they are at, right at the center of their core being. Anything less than this is certain to lead to a big fat rejection and a ton of embarrassment. So one of the things you see going on in the body paragraphs is just what we were talking about in the introductions. Teeter-totter balance, the colloquial, the vernacular, and academic. I love words like a ratchet, really good. And compelled, grandiose. So the vocab has to be up a little bit, but there's tons of vernacular and colloquial in here as well. All of this took 12 sentences to achieve. If we go back, 1 and 2 were talked about in 1 and 2 in order. All the quotes, all the paraphrases are pertinent, linked, and in line, in sync with the 1 and the 2 that we dropped in the promise of the first premise. And that's how you keep a clear, cogent line of reasoning. So, what should I do next? Bust out another syllogism. For this essay, my students did 4 paragraphs, intro, 2 bodies, and a conclusion paragraph. So let's do one more syllogism just to really hammer home how to do it. So again, we're going to have that 3-sentence why reason, argument containing a why reason, always 3 sentences, teeter-totter balance, the quoting and the paraphrasing, embed those quotes, links, echoes, promise in the conclusion of the syllogistic body paragraph. So let's see what we have at play here in these first 3 sentences. It seems to me like this is an all or nothing proposition. This is why you must go big or go home. Given that you've had a massive crush on Riley ever since the 6th grade, you know that anything less than something grandiose just won't cut it. Further, a big love such as yours necessitates an even bigger expression of it, right? So we got our why reasons very manifest in here, right? Go big or go home, and you've been holding this crush for 5 straight years. Let's go. Step to the plate and make it big. So now we got to talk about making it big. We have to keep our promise, right? This has a singular focus. We did not enumerate or anything. So all the advice here is go big because you have such a big love. It has to be big. So 4th sentence starts the 2nd premise. Begin quoting, begin paraphrasing. Even some of our peers who are already in committed relationships, like David, realize that once you're into a relationship, you have to step up your game and do a kick-ass proposal. So that's from source F. And we saw that quote in the previous example, right? So this is just a different student with a different angle. So really interesting how you can bend the language to fit your thesis. We quote, we analyze. A big promposal is what people expect nowadays, and nothing less than big will do for Riley. It's all about the fantasy and the allure of being pursued. Take it as an example, Donica, who asserts that it has been engraved in our teenage brains that our stud for a boyfriend or the chiseled boy in the front of the class would come and awkwardly ask you to prom. Source F. Let's analyze that. Let me tell you point blank. Be that chiseled stud and coordinate something extraordinary in terms of your promposal. Several people have taken the lead on this, so let's take a look at a few stellar examples. Peter, a junior in Boise, Idaho, parachuted onto the football field during the homecoming game and choreographed a flash mob to express his interest to Samantha, the head cheerleader. Source I. So we're just paraphrasing, right? So teeter-totter balance the quoting and the paraphrasing. One shouldn't be done so much more at the expense of the other. While everyone told Peter that he had no chance, Samantha later stated that she said yes because the stunt was adorably romantic, something far beyond the boring and timid request of Brad, the star quarterback. Source I. Conclusion. We're going to wrap this up, and this just takes a couple of sentences. Clearly, if it worked in this situation, it definitely will work on Riley. I don't know about the logic here, but you see where it's going. We could do a whole lesson on logical fallacies here, but that's besides the point. While you probably don't need to jettison yourself from a plane, you nonetheless need to think big and act quickly. And again, that took 12 sentences. So very cogent line of reason. I always go back to where the student began. Did you keep this promise? Are all the quotes, all the paraphrases linked and anchored in that promise? And the answer is absolutely yes. So very good. So we're at the end of this writing workshop. And just as by way of announcing, I am now offering my Teach It Right 5-week mastermind with the National Writing Project. So what we've been doing is meeting for 5 consecutive weeks, Sunday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So it's 5 consecutive Sundays for 1 hour a pop. So it's a total of 5 hours. But here's the kicker. NWP is awarding a badge, a PD badge of 10 completion hours for that course. So those of you needed some real good PD and want to learn more about my templates, my alternative grading methods, my Plato's Plato discussion, my Nuance Academy, my Word Study Academy, come check us out. So you can email me information at teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com or visit my webpage at www.teachinghowtowrite.com, or you can go to nwp.org. So Know that we're also in the midst of putting together a self-paced course, which will be ready very shortly. We're like 10 days away from launching that. So if freeing up 5 hours of your time on Sunday evenings isn't doable, know that there's going to be a self-paced course, and that likewise is going to get you 10 PD hours, a badge of 10 PD hours. So the other thing I have going on, got many irons in the fire. I'll be doing webinars, free webinars with Perfection Learning throughout the academic year. So keep your antennae open for those announcements. And then in November, my good buddies Tim Freitas, Brandon Abden, and I will be presenting at the NCTE conference in Anaheim, California. So stay tuned. Lots going on in my world. So be well for now. Happy teaching. Happy